Wasatch Report, shooting straight on everything from prepping to politics. The Wasatch Report, shooting straight on everything from prepping to politics.
And on the road to sweetest I stick in the hand. Full damsel I did cry, Johnny I hardly knew ya.
Well, good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Wasatch Report. I am Suzanne Sherman, your host this morning on the Cerberus Radio Network, where we defend freedom and liberty from the flames of tyranny. Today is Wednesday, January 10th, year of our Lord 2018, and we do have a live call-in number. It's 717-467-1736. Got Johnson, my producer and one of the founders of the network, manning the phone line and producing my show. Thank you very much, Jeff. We're doing an extra show this week. We're usually on Mondays following Jeff Johnson's show, The Paradigm Shift. He got the name for that show by kind of our mission plan on this network here is to get people to think outside what we have been conditioned to think, to unplug the matrix, to pull a phrase from our good friend Mark Creslin's show, unplug from the matrix and see things for what they really are, not what you have been told they are. Jeff Johnson also co-hosts a show here with the other founder of the network, Daniel Bailey. Their show airs Sunday evenings. That's the Renegade and the Rambler show. And then when Daniel's work schedule allows, he has a show on called the Bailey Report. You can find our shows on YouTube. And please subscribe and give our videos a like if you're so inclined. You can also find us on Radio Co. There's also a low option bandwidth. You can follow us on Facebook, facebook.com/Cerberus Radio Network. I want to encourage you to join our group too. We have a fan page, facebook.com/CRN fan page. You can find me on Facebook, facebook.com/Cowgirl Esquire. I also have some blogs you can find, cowgirlesquireblog.wordpress.com. I'll post those again occasionally. Blogs also on the 10th Amendment Center. Speaking of the 10th Amendment Center, we have some podcasts, some older podcasts, but they're still very informative, by our good friend Mike Meharry, who is the communications director of the 10th Amendment Center. He also does a podcast with Peter Schiff called the Schiff Gold Podcasts, and those are in our library for your listening pleasure as well. And they're also very informative. If you're interested in learning about investing in gold, join him with Peter Schiff and give those a listen. I have a couple of quick announcements. The Western Wildlife Conservation Expo is going to be returning to the Salt Palace here in Salt Lake City this year. So that is February 8th through 10th. It's a lot of fun. I've been going the past few years. That is also right by the City Creek Mall. So you can just have a great time of checking out everything at the expo. Some great restaurants there as well. Want to turn to also some sad news on the local front here as well. And this was a loss not just for the Mormon community, but for everyone else as well. And we lost Thomas S. Monson. He was the 16th president of the LDS Church. He was an inexperienced 23-year-old Mormon bishop with a distressing problem that would define life, and he went on to become the president of the Mormon Church here. This is an article from the Deseret News. I'm going to just share a little bit of the information here. He had the distinct spiritual prompting to leave a priesthood leadership meeting as his stake president was speaking and visit an elderly member of his congregation in the hospital. It seemed rude to stand, shuffle over 20 people to exit as his presiding leader spoke. Instead, he sat uncomfortably until the talk ended, then bolted to the door before the closing prayer. This is some personal stories about his life. He was 10 years as the prophet leader of the Church of Latter-day Saints, closed a distinctive era in church leadership during his time as one of the longest-serving apostles in Mormon history. The church member expanded from 2.1 million members to 15.9 million, and the number of temples grew from 12 to 159. If you go to the hunting expo, by the way, that is right by Temple Square. It is absolutely beautiful all year long. I go there to see the lights displayed at Christmas, and then in the spring and summer as well, they have beautiful displays of flowers. So, our thoughts and condolences to the Mormon community for the loss they had there to them. So, hey, Jeff, I think it was a couple weeks ago, we shared a story about a veteran in the Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania area. And I brought this story in as an example of what happens when traditional family relationships break down, which is what happened in this gentleman's life. David Cameron, I think is his name. And his wife had been hospitalized or institutionalized with advanced Alzheimer's disease. He did not want to leave her, and he lived alone in a home that was signed over from the wife's family to his stepdaughter. So he did not have his name on the deed of his home. He had a falling out with his stepdaughter, and she sought help from the Veterans Administration for help for this gentleman as he started to struggle from some physical maladies. And the caregiver that ended up living with him was a woman who had him sign her over as his power of attorney as his daughter, which was fraudulent. And she absolutely, with her family, pillaged his savings and the income as it came in from his monthly benefits. She had her family move into the home with him, all their dogs, cats. The home has been destroyed. We have an update right now. You won't see the video, but you will be able to hear what the result is right now. Jeff, do you have that available to play?
Yes, I do. Here it comes.
Thank you.
BKA investigation, the story of an aging veteran who was kicked out of his house by the people who are supposed to take care of him.
Well, now that family is facing eviction and is under investigation by multiple agencies. KDK investigator Andy Sheehan has this story now, new at 6.
Yes, I'm coming out, yes.
A few weeks back, we told you the sad tale of Don Cameron, an aging U.S. Army vet who seems to have misplaced his trust in a home health aide named Melissa Miller, who moved her family into his house and moved Don out. Even had Don sign this power of attorney, giving her control over all of his finances, making thousands of dollars in purchases while all bills and utilities went unpaid.
They've stripped everything from this man. Everything. His life, he worked for this, his whole life is gone. His home, his cars, his property. They've destroyed it, and now they won't leave.
I just flat got took. People robbed me left and right. I just think about it, I just shudder.
But even though Don is now in this apartment 2 towns away, Miller and her family have refused to leave. Today, this constable may force their hand with this order of eviction. Non-payment of rent, no lease, and they've been verbally warned to vacate in the past.
12-2 and a written notice on 12-9.
Inside the house, you could hear dogs barking and young people's voices. A teenage girl came to the door but did not linger. So the constable left this notice for Millers to appear in court in 10 days, but not before getting a glimpse inside.
A lot of dogs inside the home. The home is very, very, seemed like destroyed inside from what I could see from the kitchen. There's a lot of garbage in there.
And pictures taken recently and a surprise visit by Don's stepdaughter confirm the house is filthy, filled with garbage and clutter amid all the dogs and cats. And while now eviction seems likely, the Millers are also under investigation by County Adult Protective Services and 2 police departments, including the Hermitage Police, who say they're now ready to turn their findings over to the district attorney.
And so we have to try to piece it all together and make sense out of it and present it for potential prosecution.
Cases like it can be painstaking, but given what the constable saw today, he says it calls for immediate action. Telling Cameron's stepdaughter, Nadine Carson, He'll be turning the matter over to code enforcement.
Need to get them out of there because it's very bad in there.
Who would do this to anybody, especially an 81-year-old disabled veteran? They totally took advantage of this man.
The house is in shambles, but the Miller family is still here. But that may not be the case for very long. With multiple agencies and now a district justice breathing down their neck, it appears their stay here will be limited. In West Middlesex, Andy Sheehan, KDKA TV News.
What an infuriating story. You know, Jeff, my thoughts when I first heard this was if that was my father or my family member, I'd want to just show up there with a bunch of friends and run them out myself. What was your first reaction when I shared this story with you?
It's the video really tells so much more of the tale, because I mean, this house is just destroyed outside and inside.
Let's make sure we put that video up too, by the way.
What's that?
Let's make sure we put that video up as well. I'm sorry.
Yes.
I interrupted you. Go on.
Yes, but it's a shame. I mean, this guy is obviously a disabled vet. He's well up there. She said 81. It's just awful, and they've stolen every penny. I mean, he gets. I don't know how he lives, honestly.
Yeah, and if you look at the video, you can see there is just trash piled up all outside the house, and it's even worse inside. And what had happened was Nadine is the stepdaughter of his wife, and they had a falling out, and she did try to seek help for him. And it's difficult because if you have a family member that's pushing you away and you can't help, and I have personal experience with this, you have to seek help where you can get it. But as I say so often, when you seek help from the government, you're going to be disappointed. And here is just such an egregious example of how bad the assistance you can get from them can be. When you substitute government for family, the outcome is going to be poor. But I do have an update also that's not in this story, because I found out about this. One of my followers on Facebook is actually this gentleman is this person's uncle. And they said that the man now, Mr. Cameron, is living with his stepdaughter, Nadine. So bridges have been repaired. I think that's good news. And these people are going to be removed from the premises. The problem is, and I was discussing this with a friend of mine who's an expert in real estate law as well as elder law, so he was uniquely suited to comment on this, is these people are judgment proof. You're not going to get any sort of pay out of them. They're just going to go through, get out of here and get on some other Section 8 or government assisted housing. She actually sent me the Facebook page of one of the people living in the house, and it was so profane, so pornographic, so disgusting and vile. I couldn't share that. But those are the people that are inhabiting this gentleman's house right now. So it's a sad story, but it does look like it's having as good a resolution as we can get. He is, again, living with family, with his stepdaughter. He doesn't have to leave the town where his wife is hospitalized. And hopefully this family can mend some fences and find the love for each other that they should have. And I'll keep you posted as the family member lets me know. But again, there's not going to be any sort of compensation. I am certain of what has been taken from him. And this is, again, when the government interferes with our family lives, we're not going to have a positive outcome. I want to also follow up on something. We have our senator here, Mike Lee, who I remember 2 years ago, he passed an amendment to a bill. And this, I'm referring to a couple articles, one from the Libertas Institute and one from Reason magazine or Reason.com. A lot of people don't like Reason, but there are some good articles here. But Mike Lee had passed an amendment to a law that would prohibit the general government from punishing parents interfering with their decisions to let their kids walk to school in the manner, unsupervised. And what I responded to him was, Senator Lee, this is Jeff, do me a favor, look under Article 1, Section 8 and see if regulating kids walking to school is an enumerated power, or parenting is an enumerated power. And when you find that, let me know. In the meantime, I'll refer to this article. Senator Mike Lee passed an amendment ensuring that the federal government may not expose parents to civil or criminal charges for allowing their child to responsibly and safely travel to and from school by a means parents believe is age appropriate. Now, according to the Constitution as ratified, the general government has the power to punish 3 crimes. Those are counterfeiting, treason, and piracy on the high seas. So, my response was, thanks a lot, Senator Lee, but you're saying you're going to refrain from punishing us in an area in which you have no constitutional authority to even regulate in the first place. But this is how far we have gone, where every power grab, every usurpation of our liberty to make decisions on behalf of our own family, it's just accepted as being taken away. And when a little bit is divvied back, we're supposed to be grateful. This is what I did for you. No, you didn't. No, you didn't. So the general government, thanks to Mike Lee, has passed on punishing these sort of crimes, as they would call them. And Utah law, however, does not have this protection. So we have a senator out here, Lincoln Fillmore, Republican senator, is sponsoring Senate Bill 65 to make reasonable changes to the state code. And if the lawmakers pass Senate Bill 65, parents who want to give their kids a smidge of childhood freedom, we won't have to worry about a knock on the door from cops or child protective service workers second-guessing the decision to send their kids outside without a security detail. This was from Reason. Senator Lincoln Fillmore presents the bill, and he explains to the Deseret News, loving parents who empower their children to practice and learn from a bit of independence should not be subject to criminal penalties. We all want to protect our children, and sometimes that means protecting them from government agencies that may use flimsy pretexts to undermine parental rights and remove children who are merely experiencing something called childhood. Jeff, you and I are about the same age. I'm betting that you have similar memories that I do as from childhood. And I lived in California. We, as kids, I walked to school in kindergarten. I had a little friend that would walk up the hill, and we would wait for her to get to my house, and then I'd run across the street, and we would walk to school unescorted. And sometimes I even did this by myself. And then when we moved from San Francisco to another community and I was old enough to ride a bicycle, I rode my bicycle to school without a security detail. And then when I finally got a car, of course, it was so important that all of a sudden now I was able to drive to school. But, kids did this. We went to the playgrounds on our own. I mean, we went fishing on our own. Do you remember having to have a parent watch you every step you took?
No, I was just going to say that it's a good thing this law wasn't passed when I was a kid, because I walked starting in 4th grade, I did. Kindergarten through 3rd, I was at a school that was too far to walk to. But at 4th grade, the school was only about 4 blocks from my house. So I ended up walking or riding my bike. I mean, good grief. I grew up on an island. I would walk my little brother down to the beach, down at the bay all the time. I mean, and I'm talking, I wasn't very old either. It's ridiculous. They now want, I realize society has gotten more dangerous, but at the same time, your neighborhood, what's going on there. Parents need to be able to be parents. The government is a nanny state. We just need to stop obeying them, I guess. It's going to take civil disobedience, I think, in some of these areas.
Yeah, and you know, speaking of civil disobedience, I'll address that in a minute as well. I remember when my two boys were younger, and I'd have to go pick up one of them when they were in school. At the time, I had them in a local private school, and my son was 7. And the first time I left him alone, he was 7. And my thought was, oh my gosh, is he going to be okay? My thought was, goodness gracious, I'm glad my house has a gate on it so somebody doesn't knock on the door and find out I have a child here by himself. I think the law at the time was 12 or now 14. I mean, kids were babysitting when they were 12 years old when I was a kid. So, you know, we have this, and I remember my cousin and I, we'd go out and dig for night crawlers and then walk to the local river through forest and go fishing on our own. And we were maybe 7, 9 years old, something like that. So anyway, this goes back talking about Utah now. And we do have more freedom here. It was, again, Senator Mike Lee who passed the amendment. I guess it was to the Every Child Succeeds Act. Also, can you look up child success under Article 1, Section 8? Let's see if that's in there. But the federal law added that nothing in this shall be construed to preempt state or local laws. Well, duh, nor should they when they're not even constitutional in the first place. So Utah is, as they should, because this is a matter, again, according to the 10th Amendment, reserved, the states reserved to them. The federal government doesn't reserve it to the states. The states created the general government. I quote John Taylor of Caroline. It was their ultimate act of sovereignty when the states created this government. So returning to the article, to make sure in Utah, parents are not prosecuted for simply letting their kids take advantage of the very safe area we live in. By the way, it says in here also, the Utah crime rate dropped again in 2017. Utah is now weighing similar legislation of its own. And it's really sad we have to have legislation like this. You get a lot of the parents that can't mind their own business will report kids that they believe are, you know, walking around unsupervised, and to some people that's simply unacceptable. One thing they say in this article I disagree with is they say every state should follow Utah's lead. You know what? What the other states are doing is really none of my business or concern, any more than what Great Britain is doing with their children, any more than what Spain or Mexico or Cuba is doing with their children. Utah is a sovereign and independent state, according to the Constitution as ratified. Libertas Institute supports this bill, and their position is this important parental rights legislation can steer Utah clear of any of the many notorious examples happening where police and bureaucrats intervene, separate children and parents, etc., all because of reasonable activity, sometimes called free-range parenting, that many of us engaged in as children. Connor Boyack is quoted here. I quote Connor frequently. He is really an up-and-coming character out here in Utah and in the Liberty movement. I was actually having a conversation with a friend of mine out here in the area, and we are of the opinion that Connor really should start getting involved in political office. I would absolutely love to see him as a senator at some point. Anyway, going back to the article here, what Connor says is he was disturbed by stories about parents being arrested simply for letting their kids play outside or even wait in the car for a few minutes on a temperate day. Another thing the Utah bill would allow for kids at least supervised by somebody over 9 years old. So a couple of examples that were really disturbing were one in South Carolina. Deborah Harrell, 9-year-old daughter, was taken away for 17 days after she let her daughter play in a popular park without supervision. Jeff, I remember when I was 6 years old going to my school playground and playing, and my mom stayed home. Connecticut, a woman named Maria Hassan-Colley was handcuffed and arrested after she overslept and her 8-year-old daughter walked to school alone. Texas, children were interviewed by caseworkers after a woman let her 6-year-old play 150 feet from the home. 12-year-old daughter was asked if her parents ever showed her movies with people's private parts. I mean, this is just egregious government intervention into the family unit. And Jeff, what have we talked about before that we're going to start doing some shows on? Agenda 21 for Dummies is a video that you can find on YouTube. Agenda 21 is now being called Agenda 30. If you think this is tinfoil hat stuff, you go to the United Nations webpage and you see all of the bits of legislation, regulation that they have that are in accordance with Agenda 21 or Agenda 30, and you won't even have enough hours in the day to go through all of them. So this is real. One of the goals they want to do is substitute the collective for the individual. The way they do that is by stripping away traditional family values and taking away the influence of the family, substituting that for the influence and loving guidance of the government. So this is just another example of what's going on. I applaud Utah for standing up to this and giving parents the advice, or I'm sorry, the freedom they should have to raise their children. We'll take a quick break, reset the table, and then I want to address a little bit more of our lack of federalism. We'll start with some of the marijuana laws and issues that have been discussed in the news lately, and then we're going to go on to the really big news of the day, particularly out in my neck of the woods here, and that is the dismissal with prejudice of the Bundy family. So we'll be back after this break. This is the Wasatch Report. Suzanne Sherman here on the Cerberus Radio Network, defending freedom and liberty from the flames of tyranny.
The Wasatch Report, shooting straight on everything from prepping to politics.
And on the road to sweet a thigh, a stick in the hand. Full damsel I did cry, Johnny, I hardly knew ya.
Well, good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Wasatch Report. I am Suzanne Sherman, your host this morning on the Cerberus Radio Network, where we defend freedom and liberty from the flames of tyranny. Today is Wednesday, January 10th, year of our Lord 2018, and we do have a live call-in number. It's 717-467-1736. Got Johnson, my producer and one of the founders of the network, manning the phone line and producing my show. Thank you very much, Jeff. We're doing an extra show this week. We're usually on Mondays following Jeff Johnson's show, The Paradigm Shift. He got the name for that show by kind of our mission plan on this network here is to get people to think outside what we have been conditioned to think, to unplug the matrix, to pull a phrase from our good friend Mark Kreslin's show, unplug from the matrix and see things for what they really are, not what you have been told they are. Jeff Johnson also co-hosts a show here with the other founder of the network, Daniel Bailey. Their show airs Sunday evenings. That's the Renegade and the Rambler show. And then when Daniel's work schedule allows, he has a show on called the Bailey Report. You can find our shows on YouTube. And please subscribe and give our videos a like if you're so inclined. You can also find us on Radio Co. There's also a low option bandwidth. You can follow us on Facebook, facebook.com/Cerberus Radio Network. I want to encourage you to join our group too. We have a fan page, facebook.com/CRN fan page. You can find me on Facebook, facebook.com/Cowgirl Esquire. I also have some blogs you can find, Cowgirl Esquire blog.wordpress.com. I'll post those again occasionally. Blogs also on the 10th Amendment Center. Speaking of the 10th Amendment Center, we have some podcasts, some older podcasts, but they're still very informative, by our good friend Mike Meharry, who is the communications director of the 10th Amendment Center. He also does a podcast with Peter Schiff called the Schiff Gold Podcasts, and those are in our library for your listening pleasure as well. And they're also very informative if you are interested in learning about investing in gold. Join him with Peter Schiff and give those a listen. I have a couple of quick announcements. the Western Wildlife Conservation Expo is going to be returning to the Salt Palace here in Salt Lake City this year. So that is February 8th through 10th. It's a lot of fun. I've been going the past few years. That is also right by the City Creek Mall. So you can just have a great time of checking out everything at the expo. Some great restaurants there as well. Want to turn to also some sad news on the local front here as well. And this was a loss not just for the Mormon community, but for everyone else as well. And we lost Thomas S. Monson. He was the 16th president of the LDS Church. He died at 10:01 p.m. Tuesday in his Salt Lake City home at the age of 90. He was an inexperienced 23-year-old Mormon bishop with a distressing problem that would define life. And he went on to become the president of the Mormon Church here. This is an article from the Deseret News. I'm going to just share a little bit of the information here. He had the distinct spiritual prompting to leave a priesthood leadership meeting as his stake president was speaking and visit an elderly member of his congregation in the hospital. It seemed rude to stand, shuffle over 20 people to exit as his presiding leader spoke. Instead, he sat uncomfortably until the talk ended, then bolted to the door before the closing prayer. This is some personal stories about his life. He was 10 years as the prophet leader of the Church of Latter-day Saints, closed a distinctive era in church leadership during his time as one of the longest serving apostles in Mormon. Relevant. And I put option 3, moral. And he said, give me an example. And I said, Switzerland. And he said, that's because they're incapable. Well, that's exactly what we were intended to be. We were supposed to be incapable of world domination. The founding generation, the framers, feared a standing army. Case in point, and this is something we just found right before the show, and then we'll get into the Bundy situation. We do have time. Nikki Haley, I cannot stand her. She, I think, rose to really popularity among conservatives because she apparently did a photo op or an interview with her out at a range shooting AR-15s, and all of a sudden everybody just embraced her. That's how stupid people are. Anyway, she also folded like a deck of cards, immediately having the Virginia battle flag, the state flag, taken down from state property in response to the Mother Emanuel shooting. I have zero respect for this woman. James Woods, actor in California, is calling for her to be president of the United States in 2024. After standing tough, in his opinion, to the United Nations with regards to where we put our embassy in Israel. Here she is now calling for an emergency meeting at the United Nations. This is an article out of the American Conservative. Actually, the American Conservative was the first place to publish one of my articles. That was the one called Will the Founders Be Remembered as Slaveholders? Anyway, informing Iran, this is the article, the U.S. is watching what you do. Ambassador Nikki Haley called an emergency meeting Friday of the Security Council regarding riots in Iran. The session left her and us looking ridiculous. No, not me. She doesn't represent me. France's ambassador tutored Haley that how nations deal with internal disorders is not the council's concern. Russia's ambassador suggested that the United Nations should have looked into our Occupy Wall Street clashes and how the Missouri cops handled Ferguson. 50 years ago, 100 U.S. cities erupted in flames after Martin Luther King's assassination. Federal troops were called in 1992. Los Angeles suffered the worst U.S. riot of the 20th century, and the LA cops who pummeled Rodney King were acquitted in Simi Valley. Was our handling of these riots any business of the United Nations? You know, and here's the other thing too. Conservatives are up in arms over one of the council member, I believe, of Chicago calling for the United Nations to come in and restore peace in Chicago. Oh, that's none of the United Nations business. Now all of a sudden their little darling Nikki Haley is calling for United Nations involvement in local dealings in Iran. Jeff, I mean, can we have a little bit of consistency or some intellectual honesty in these discussions, please?
Well, it'd be very nice. I mean, we've discussed the UN at length, and quite honestly, we do need to get to this Agenda 21 and Agenda 30 stuff because it is relevant today. A lot of the stuff we see, I mean, just down to local stuff. How many places around the United States now have traffic circles popping up? I know they built a number of them around here, and that's all right off Agenda 21. So, I mean, this isn't tinfoil hat stuff. I mean, we're talking even down to how they're building intersections now. It's coming from the UN. So the UN's highly involved in the United States, but what happens in Iran is not our business. Just as what happened in Ferguson, as Russia rightly pointed out, was none of the UN's business.
Yeah,
So,
yeah. This is
let's
a
just
great
be honest
article.
about it.
We'll put it up on our fan page and the radio page. I'll post it as well. I won't read the whole thing, but it really is an example of the hypocrisy. You know, where the so-called conservatives demand sovereignty when it comes to our business, but we can't seem to stay out of anybody else's. And on my show on, I think it was Monday, last week, I discussed the Migratory Bird Act, for instance, and how an overreaching federal government with zero authority to regulate birds. First, it was rejected under the Commerce Clause because the Commerce Clause was never intended to regulate birds. So they just did an end run around the Constitution and said, well, we have a treaty-making power, and we're going to enter a treaty and circumvent the 10th Amendment, making the states irrelevant. And, you know, you might not think, again, that this is important because criminy, this is just birds. Who really cares about that? And who cares, Suzanne, if you can, you know, bury your owl that you died outside your chicken coop, or if you have to dispose of it or to, you know, turn it into DNR. We really don't care. Well, you know what? You should care, because there are other treaties that have been discussed. One of which might be of concern to you was the United Nations Gun Treaty. So these treaties and this usurpation of power, again, the general government has zero authority to regulate firearms. That is reasserted in the Second Amendment. It's not a grant of freedom of any kind. It's a reassertion that the general government has zero authority to regulate that, but they're going to go around again. What was reserved by the states to the general government stays with the states. According to the 10th Amendment, we're going to usurp the 10th Amendment. First of all, they just ignore the Second Amendment anyway, as we know, 20,000 gun laws. But to also go around this further as a treaty is another egregious violation. So we'll share that link.
There's one good sentence in this I want to read because it's such a good sentence, and it does highlight the problem we face in the United States today. This episode exposes a malady of American foreign policy. It lacks consistency, coherence, and moral clarity, treats friends and adversaries by separate standards, and is reflexively interventionist. That is America.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, you tell me why Saudi Arabia, with their absolutely horrific treatment of Christians, of gays, of women, is our closest ally in the Mideast. And to say that we are going to go against Syria while giving Saudi Arabia a pass. Why did we go into Afghanistan? Who founded 9/11? So it's just an example of our egregious behavior, our inconsistency in foreign affairs. I really like to keep it simple. Friendly relations towards all with entangling alliances with none. What is so hard about that? And this is what's so frustrating is people seem to think that this imperialism, these wars are nonstop intervention. Again, there's a difference between non-intervention and isolationism, which was a term we saw thrown around a lot during the presidential campaign. Non-intervention is the way to peace and prosperity. And you know, that is really what we should be pursuing. But again, we have these arguments and these people say, well, we're never going to be strong. Who else is going to lead the world? Why does somebody have to lead the world? And let's say Russia were to lead the world. If we stayed strong and prosperous and our government adhered to its restraints that were put upon it, do you really think that this would be such a bad place, Jeff? I really don't.
No, then you know, in that clip you played of Ron Paul, he's talking about it. You know, they want these endless wars. They can't cut spending on all these endless wars, and we're $21 trillion in debt. One of the biggest things I always ask: how much defense are we going to have? National defense, if you want to use the N word there, national defense we're going to have once we go bankrupt and there's no more money to pay for any military. What's a better thing? Be not an interventionist and have the ability to defend ourselves at home, or keep going all over the world, bankrupt ourselves, and then have nothing. Again, it's beyond. It's
Well,
beyond
and again, keeping all these people employed and having this huge military industrial complex and government employees with their attached pensions are a way of buying loyalty. Alexander Hamilton recognized that. So by keeping these people on the pension roll here, that buys their loyalty. And that's what happens when we have such a bloated government. But I want to turn to the Bundy situation, another example of egregious federal behavior. By the way, I don't know if you saw it last night, but I posted a PBS documentary about Ruby Ridge last night, and they have a in-depth interview with Randy Weaver's daughter. And I think I'd like to do a show on that at some point. But if you tie in Ruby Ridge, excuse me, Waco, and then the Bundy situation here, also the Malheur Reserve in Oregon. These people took over, yes, well, they took over a federal government building. You know what? Nothing was destroyed. The building was perfectly intact. And look at the difference between that and, say, Baltimore mayor's response and lack of federal response to the destruction of Baltimore. These people need
Suzanne,
space to destroy. Yeah, go ahead.
And that building there in Oregon was closed for the season. I mean, it was winter. Yeah. It was closed for the season. They were displacing nobody.
No, absolutely. And look what happened to Lavoy Finicum. He was murdered. He was executed. So I think more of this information is going to come out. And I told you about my friend Bill Keebler. He was actually on his way to assist Lavoy. He was personal friends with them, and he was also the head of the security over at the Bundys. As we know, the Bundy family called their friends and militia members in the community to come and assist them. And I want to get into some of the reasons why this case was finally dismissed with prejudice. Now, with prejudice means that the behavior of the government in prosecuting this case was so egregious that Judge Gloria Navarra declared a mistrial with prejudice, meaning they cannot refile. Jeff Sessions had indicated already that he would seek retrial. So she slammed the door on that one. I've been very critical of her, so she did make the right decision. So I will tip my hat to her on that one. I want to share this article from fee.org. I've seen a lot of articles covering this debacle, but the Foundation for Economic Education is a go-to. I really, really like their take on relevant issues. And this is an article by James Bovard, who says the Justice Department was caught in another high-profile travesty, which is exactly what this is, last month that continues to reverberate through the Western states. On December 20th, federal judge Gloria Navarro declared a mistrial in the case against Nevada rancher Cliven Bundy and others after prosecutors were caught withholding massive amounts of evidence undermining federal charges. This is the latest in a long series of federal law enforcement debacles that have spurred vast distrust of Washington. Now, I used to practice criminal defense, and in a court of law, the goal is to seek justice. For the prosecution, it is not or should not be simply to get a conviction. It should be to find the truth and justice will be served. For the defense, it must be to make the prosecution, the people, do their job and prove guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. So what does that mean? That means we have this thing called discovery, where both sides have to present evidence, be it good or bad. The prosecution must present exculpatory evidence if it has it. If the defense comes up with evidence that could be damning to their client, then they have to provide that. It is the truth by which justice will be served. So the government, in this case here, withheld a tremendous amount of evidence. And Bundy, who was, as we know, 71-year-old Nevadan rancher, and his sons and his supporters were involved in an armed standoff with BLM thugs. And when I say BLM thugs, I'm not talking about Black Lives Matter. I'm talking about the Bureau of Land Management, who makes Black Lives Matter, to me, look like a bunch of Boy Scouts. This started in 2014. It stemmed from decades of unpaid cattle grazing fees and restrictions. The Bundys claimed that the federal government were on a vendetta against them, and 3,300 pages of documents the Justice Department wrongfully concealed from their lawyers provide smoking guns that buttressed their case. I remember, and this wasn't even part of this, this was just out in the open when people from Utah started to come out and show support for the Bundy family. Remember, now the federal government set up First Amendment areas, meaning this is a little area that we're going to pick where you can stand and wave your flags. Harry Reid from Nevada, senator from Nevada, said that those inbred bastards from Utah were showing up. So this is really just his own words were very damning in his biases against this case. So there was a whistleblowing memo by BLM chief investigator, again, hats off to this guy, Larry Wooten, charges that BLM chose the most intrusive, oppressive, large-scale, and militaristic trespass cattle seizure possible against Bundy. He also cited widespread pattern of misjudgment, lack of discipline, incredible bias, I alluded to that earlier as well, unprofessionalism, and misconduct, as well as likely policy, ethical, and legal violations by BLM officials in the case. There was a sheriff, I forgot his name, that was working out there in cahoots with BLM, and Harry Reid had given him an award at the end of the year. I'll have to find that name. I don't actually really even care who it was now. BLM agents even bragged, and I remember seeing the pictures of him, of roughing up Dave Bundy, grinding his face into the ground, and Dave Bundy having little bits of gravel stuck in his face while he was videotaping federal agents. Wooten also said that anti-Mormon prejudice pervaded the BLM's crackdown. Again, Harry Reid was very outspoken, and he had no shame in expressing his sentiments. So the feds charged the Bundys with conspiracy in large part because the ranchers summoned militia to defend them after they claimed FBI snipers had surrounded their ranch. Justice Department lawyers scoffed at this claim in prior trials involving the standoff, but newly released documents confirmed that snipers were in place prior to the Bundys' call for help. So let me back up now. There's another story that's going on that, well, I shouldn't say it's a story. It's actually a non-story, but it shouldn't be a non-story. There's a gentleman that lived in Stockton, Utah, which is on the outskirts of Tooele, which is west of Utah. It's kind of very in the middle of nowhere. And this was a guy named Bill Keebler. And I knew him through some mutual friends out here in Utah. He had a rally in March of, I think, 2015 or 16. He had a rally. Yeah, 2015, I believe it was. 2016, sorry. 2016, he had a rally out in West Valley. And we had Michelle Fiora, who was a representative from the state of Nevada, Sheriff Mack of the Constitutional Sheriff's Association, and Lavoy Finicum, two of his daughters were there. And it was a patriotic rally. And Bill Keebler, that was the first time I had met him. I had known him. We had spoken on the phone. He was always a pretty pretty level-headed guy. He was into teaching people how to live sustainably. He also had a militia, but he was about living sustainably and would teach people how to harvest, process, raise rabbits, can them, store food. Bill Keebler was in charge of security. The Bundy family contacted him and said, "Can you help us out?" I spoke to Bill Keebler several times on the phone after this event. And this was when I first started my show on the Veritas Radio Network, the Suzanne Option, and I wanted him to come on and talk with me. And he said, absolutely, No, under no circumstances would he talk. His tone in his conversations had become extremely agitated. We eventually had a falling out, and he got very upset with me because I had mentioned his fear of speaking out. He thought I was implying that he was a coward. I wasn't. His fear was justified because he is now in custody on charges thanks to an FBI confidential informant that he had tried to set off a pipe bomb outside a BLM facility office in Salt Lake City. Jeff, when it comes to FBI and confidential informants, to me, that has zero credibility. But what gets me here is this man knew that something was coming. He said, they are going to get me. They're coming to get me. Because remember, they had facial recognition software. They had drones. They had, scopes. They were looking to see who was out there. And he knew they were coming for him. And they did. But what is crucial here, the piece of the puzzle that he could have testified to, he said, Suzanne, this was awful. They had snipers pointing their guns at us the whole time we were out there. I said, Bill, did you ever once have any of your people point a gun back at these people? He said, absolutely not. We never did. He could have testified to this fact, but now guess what? He's been silenced. He's in custody. So I'm hoping that he will, I consider him a political prisoner, and I'm hoping that he will have justice served as well. So the feds, I'm going to return to the article now. The federal government here also belatedly turned over multiple threat assessments, which reveal that the Bundys were not violent or dangerous, including an FBI analysis that concluded the BLM, was trying to provoke a conflict with the Bundys. As an analysis in the left-leaning of all places, Intercept observed, federal missteps in the case fueled long-standing perceptions among the right-wing groups and militias that the federal government is an underhanded institution that will stop at nothing to crush the little guy and cover up his own misdeeds. Now, think about this. At the same time, Jeff, what was going on our southern border? There are parts of Texas. There are signs out there that say, do not go in this area. It is too dangerous. We have the drug cartel here. We essentially ceded some land to Mexico. We gave up our sovereignty because Obama said they did not have the resources to go out there and secure that area. But if you look, at the footage of the resources we for some reason we're able to muster up over cattle grazing fees, that story that dog won't hunt, as they say. So Navarro held a hearing. This was before the hearing. She said, as we know now, on January 8th, on whether to dismiss all charges or require a new trial. And this is what gets me, the whining of the federal government. Federal prosecutors have insisted that regardless of the latest disclosures, the judge should prohibit the Bundys from claiming that the federal government provoked the confrontation or that they acted in self-defense. For crying out loud, this is exculpatory. This shows that they were responding to what the federal government did, and they don't even want this in the trial. The lead attorney for the feds declared, the court needs to put a stop to these illegal theories and defenses this is what gets my goat, in order for the government to receive a fair trial. The government, too, is entitled to a fair trial. The government here wasn't on trial. The government here, I don't think, Jeff, was the federal prosecutor, was he in custody during this trial? I don't think so. This isn't the first time. The fair trials are the last thing, according to the article, and I agree, that high-profile federal targets like the Bundys are likely to receive. Now, this ties into what I mentioned earlier. The 1990s, the federal government decided to take down Randy Weaver. George H. Bush, Daddy Bush, was in charge there. This happened on his watch, this massacre. Randy Weaver was an outspoken, they like to focus on the white separatist. I don't know why I always see this, living on a mountaintop in northern Ohio. And you know what? even if he was a white separatist, I don't care. What happened here was they had another confidential informant go out and instruct him on where to cut off a shotgun. He had initially declined to saw off the shotgun at the length that was requested, and the Justice Department claimed he conspired to have an armed confrontation with the government. And again, the feds even claimed that he moved from Iowa to near the Canadian border as part of that plot. Jeff, I am no fan of this general government. I really am not. I moved to the mountains, and as I see he did as well, to have as little to do with this government as possible. He was actually found not guilty on all charges. We know that his wife was shot while holding their baby. His son was killed. The son's dog was killed. There's a video we posted, what we talked about earlier, by PBS that discusses this case. So we're seeing, and then again, look at Waco. I have an article I also posted that discusses the treatment of the Branch Davidians in Waco. Again, ATF was claiming illegal firearms allegations. Again, what is the common thread here? Unconstitutional laws. Randy Weaver, firearms allegation. Branch Davidians, firearms allegations. Unconstitutional laws are void and without effect. Randy Weaver was right all the time. I'm going to wrap up the show. I have a few minutes left. The Justice Department also, now I'm going back to the article about the Bundys, did the conspiracy suppression of evidence two-step against the Branch Davidians in Waco. Again, going back to that. Grand jury indictment of accused 11 Davidians who survived federal assaults of conspiring with malice aforethought to kill ATF firearms agents. The ATF's decision to launch a frontal attack on their home somehow proved that the residents sought a confrontation. We also heard allegations that these people were abusing children and that they were going in there to save these children, but instead they decided to spare them from abuse by burning them to death. The prosecutors, going back to Waco, compared David Koresh to Hitler and Stalin and denounced defendants as religious terrorists. A jury rejected those charges, and we're seeing something similar now. In the Bundy case, Judge Navarro slammed the FBI for withholding key evidence. Remember, as I said, the prosecution has an obligation to provide all evidence, including that which is exculpatory in nature. Unfortunately, this behavior seems to be standard practice for the FBI, according to the article, including their investigations of both Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton presidential campaigns, as well as the Las Vegas shooter. Whatever happened to that? That was supposed to be huge news, and that, for some reason, has been buried. FBI officials have also been caught routinely twisting the truth to burnish prosecutions. I would say bolster. False FBI trial testimony may have helped 32 people, sentence 32 people to death, as the Washington Post reported in 2015. So again, the update now, as of yesterday, which was fantastic news, Gloria Navarro has dismissed all charges against the Bundys, ending their long courtroom clash. What has been the cost to this family, personally and financially? This is a man, 71 years old, 2 years of his life spent in custody. You could say, well, he should have paid those fees. You know, nobody was being harmed here right now. Was this really worth over cattle grazing fees? This kind of violence, this kind of corruption, this kind of government egregious behavior flying in the face of justice. Gloria Navarro found outrageous government conduct and a universal sense of justice has been violated. Many of the FBI abuses occurring during St. Jim Comey's time as FBI chief. So again, this is fantastic news, but again, we have a pattern of egregious government behavior, enforcement of unconstitutional laws, and I am hoping that soon we will see enough of these cases getting dismissed, and maybe this will be turned around. I want to thank you for joining me today. Jeff, do you have any closing thoughts?
No, ma'am. Have a good day.
All right, everybody. I'm Suzanne Sherman. This has been the Wasatch Report. We'll be back soon on the Cerberus Radio Network, defending freedom and liberty from the flames of tyranny. God bless.